I'm John Merrifield, the president of the Institute for Objective Policy Assessment. And with me today is Martha Bradley Dorsey, who's the director of our Center for K through 12 Captivity Studies. And we're going to discuss the concept of captivity as it has existed for some time in our school systems and raise some of the issues that sadly many people are unaware of, how this single issue with a couple of dimensions massively affects not just our school systems, but our cities and our economy and crime and punishment and a bunch of other things. And Martha, would you like to lead the way on which of those things we discuss first and where it goes from there? Who knows?
Sure, John. Thank you for starting this. What I'd like to say first is that the problem isn't what everyone has been studying so far in general. If everyone knows that there have been fixes for math and fixes for English and reading and the way things should be done. There have been people who said violence can be solved if you take away the guns. There have been people who said segregation can be solved if we just get the court case and the money right. And people have said that performance can be improved if we just get enough money, but yet money has increased dramatically and shamefully for decades, and nothing has changed with respect to the performance. What I believe and believe passionately is that it is the structure of our public school system that has caused most of this, or at least certainly influenced it heavily. And what we call this structural problem is captivity. We have uh, boiled it down to one word, and that is captivity. What captivity means is very important. You have to understand that this public school system is very different than public school systems in other nations. This public school system is that there is essentially government funding only for government-controlled schools. Now, the school choice movement has at least made some movement in some states, but that is state by state, and politics are what they are in each state. And so you cannot count on the school choice. And I personally believe that school choice options are drying up very quickly in states. There are some states that will never have school choice. So again, government controlled schooling is the only subsidy-free choice you have in any state, by and large.
It's still the
That
dominant choice.
leads
It's still the dominant choice in every state.
It is absolutely that. Thank you. That's true. Even in the ones that talk about massive increases, I think in Florida, you've got about a 50-50 split. And Florida is the empress of all states in terms of school choice. So that even the best school choice state still has about half of its kids who must attend public schools. Now, why is that bad for the kids? Let me just go there first. Why that's bad for the kids is we all know that every child is different. I mean, we all talk about we're all snowflakes, or we're all individuals. Jokes have been made about it, but the truth is everyone is different. Even an engineer, one engineer might prefer chemical engineering and might see things and learn things in a different way than another structural engineer. So it doesn't matter. Every student out there is different. There are athletic students who can learn physics by studying athletics, but how many of them get a chance to do that? So every student should have the opportunity to be motivated, to be educated the way that their brain and their heart and mind work together to motivate them. And that is not the case in this country. Sadly, we've known this for decades. We've known that our kids have not done well, everyone used to say that in previous generations, dropout rates weren't a big problem because only certain people needed to be trained for skilled labor, and now skilled labor has improved. I actually beg to differ back when. I think imagine what we could have done with all of these students had we educated them correctly, how much faster uh, and higher, how much faster we could have improved and how much higher we could have gone in that improvement. Okay, but today we absolutely need skilled labor, and so it's an even bigger crisis than it ever was before. The, so there are so many aspects of this, John. I don't know where we should start because what we need to understand is that this is underneath the structure. I can talk about the behavior of people who are inside public schools when you realize that no one's going to leave. If you were Avon and people were forced to go and shop for their shampoo and their makeup and their cleansers at Avon, do you think Avon would ever improve? Maybe Avon's a bad example because no one knows what Avon is anymore, but whichever, I mean, if you were forced to shop there, they would never improve because they've got a captive audience who's going to purchase their product and get their money to them. But grocery stores and software companies and everybody else have to vie for your money in a government-controlled public school system where the students must attend where they live. No, they don't have to be fought over. There is no competition. There is no competitive factor. And because of that, the people inside are not motivated to do anything differently. That's one reason. Another reason is when you have one government school in a neighborhood, do you think all the kids move to that neighborhood because they're all alike? No, they don't. And they don't all learn alike. They're all different. Some of them, as we said, were athletes. Some of them are scientists. Some of them are artists, et cetera, et cetera. And they all learn differently. But they all have to go to the same school. And in our schools, they are sadly far too uniform. So everybody is being cheated. I could go on about this for a very long time, but those are some of the aspects of what captivity does to our kids. And so we have to break the back of captivity. We have to allow students, we, we have to subtract the requirement that a student has to attend school in their neighborhood if they want uh, subsidized education
Right,
in this
subsidy
country.
needs to be portable because one size can never fit all. No amount of money can make one size fit all. There are no such things as schools that people are assigned to that everybody assigned to them, it's a good fit. So that alone is a reason why we need a diverse menu of schooling options that are relentlessly improving because they're under market pressure. And that doesn't preclude having a public school system because it just means that there have to be alternatives that are on a level playing field with it so that the children for whom the assigned school is not a good fit, and there always will be such children. There is no way to not have such children en masse, so that the children for whom the assigned school is not a good fit have an alternative that they can turn to, developed by entrepreneurs that are interested in making a profit in many cases. Many of them will be nonprofit. One thing to get into for our listening audience is to not think of the private sector that we have now as the alternative to the children that are in assigned schools, because once they're no longer captive, that will unleash entrepreneurship that will significantly diversify the private sector. And that's important for a variety of reasons. One reason in my introduction, I got into about how it affects not just schooling, the flatlining of performance, even though the funding is skyrocketing, adjusted for inflation, uh, is because when you make a school a function of where you choose to live, you're going to drive up the property values near the better schools. I hasten to add that I know many people that live in the best school district in their area, and they still say they're not very good, and that's why we call them government schools. We're not trying to use a pejorative. We're trying to show that everything about them is political. Okay, and that's very important because the political process is very demeaning. And when legislators talk about, well, we need accountability, it's the current kind of accountability has yielded the mess that we're in. So we need to call them government schools because that says everything's political and that's created the mess that we're in. So we need an alternative for people for whom the assigned school and all the politics surrounding curriculum and textbook selection and everything all the way down to who's the janitor and where the supplies are purchased, all of that, an alternative to that needs to exist. We're not arguing for an end to the public school system. In fact, what we are arguing for, an end to captivity, will improve the performance of the schools in the public school system because they no longer need to be perfect, and they're never going to be, but they no longer need to pretend that they can serve all the children. And that's huge now. They have to pretend because children are captive. Okay, they can't leave and because they're too poor in many cases to pay twice, right? To pay for an alternative to the school that their taxes pay for. Uh, so because property values are now affected by the perceived quality of the school that the children are assigned to, captive of, now we have a dynamic that that creates a, a high poverty situation, okay, where we make the lowest income families a captive of the worst possible schools, which then makes them even worse. It's a terrible dynamic. I don't know how it survived over 30 years, 40, 50 years that we've recognized things through Why Johnny Can't Read, Nation at Risk. Some of you haven't heard of that. It's in 1983, a report came out that said that our schools were endangering the future of our nation. And there have been many repeated uh, pronunciations of the same thing. See, Goals 2000, One Child Left Behind. They all say the same thing. The system is broken. We need an alternative to it. But the key tenet of that system, namely the subsidy, exists only if you go to the school you're assigned to, has somehow survived the true frenzy of activity that has followed, that is somehow trying to make the system and all its flaws. And by the way, I've been looking over to the side here I'll grab my book here in a minute, School System Reform, that gets into all of that we won't have time to conversation today. All of the heroic assumptions that underlie government-run schooling and the result of politicization, can say that, uh, all of that hinges upon the notion of a neighborhood government school, which somehow sounds really cool to a lot of people, but it's devastating for our cities, concentrating poverty around the worst schools. Most of our cities are hollowed out in the core where some people dare not even go. I've heard countless stories of people saying, whoops, I got off the wrong exit on the interstate and it almost cost me my life, or terms like Beirut and whatever. And this is not for single cities, it's the norm in our United States. There are certain parts of the cities that have been destroyed, at least in part. That we can say for sure. We need to do the research to show how important this assignment and captivity is in rendering hollow inner cities and huge disparities in income between usually suburbs and sometimes some parts of the inner city. I know in Alamo Heights in San Antonio, it's a little island where people aspire to. And there's a place in north central Dallas, same thing around SMU. I can't remember what it's called. So it's not always the suburbs, but it's typically the suburbs that people go to flee the lower performing inner city schools. And then they become even lower performing because we leave only the poorest people behind near them. And because we assign children to schools, we have to have big schools, even though there's volumes of research that say that our schools are too big. But if you're going to put everybody that lives in a certain area in the same school, it has to be comprehensive to address all of the different learning issues and factors and special ed and all of that, short of the severe special ed. that is going to exist in any given attendance area. And then we create alienation, fraud, abuse, complexity issues for managing those schools and for the children in them. And one of the threads that we need to pursue through uh, my institute and Martha's Center is the issue is the notion that this is partly responsible for some of the violence that we're seeing increasingly, namely sending children from small elementary schools to giant comprehensive high schools where they're totally lost and totally alienated. And the people running them are throwing up their hands saying, I have no idea how to run this giant organization. But it has to be giant from the political perspective, because otherwise you're not addressing some of the needs. And I'm not saying addressing adequately, but pretending to provide something, aiming to provide something that somehow is going to fit all, and it never will, no matter what level of funding. And so we've got a lot of research that we still need to do, but some things are crystal clear, namely that this notion of captivity, the neighborhood public school, is a devastating requirement for where our children are going to go, and it affects not just the flatlining at low level of performance, but it affects concentrating poverty and all the results of concentrating poverty. And well, Martha, I've ranted and raved there. Hopefully that was of some use to our viewers. Uh,
John,
a lot of work to be done.
John, this might be a good time for me to respond and try to organize some of the thoughts that you and I have put out in general form that have been more or less, um, you know, stream of consciousness as you and I speak about this, because we have been concerned for a long time about these things. But I've written down a few things here that you and I have talked about. I'm going to work. Um, well, let me work from way back when you first started and move forward. You talked about how government schools are very political. There are a lot of aspects to that. One of those aspects is that they are very bureaucratic, because you have at least three levels of government politics going into them. You have the local level, you have state level, and you have the federal level. All three of those commingle, and all of a sudden you have rules and regulations and laws, because everybody has to try to solve the problems. And so these things then become very bureaucratic. Part of the bureaucracy is due to the number of employees and how many administrative employees have fed into the schools, because everyone again is trying to solve all the problems through staffing, instead of through changing the structure. So there's a lot of issues with respect to bureaucracy. One of the big things about government control and bureaucracy is that um, people who work in any organization, people who work in any organization are first and foremost self-interested. We all are. It's the way human beings have survived all of these years. We are all self-interested. When you get into an organization, even if you are consider yourself altruistic, you still are self-interested. So you get into an organization that is bureaucratic, and you are trying to navigate the bureaucracy. The organization that's political, you're trying to navigate the politics. You put all of that in there, and what it changes is the way you navigate with self-interest, not whether you are self-interested or not. That is a given. So all of those things move into there, and all of a sudden the students' needs fall to the bottom of any scale of priorities. That's one thing. Another thing that I heard you talk about is that today's system and what we have, there's very little entrepreneurialism, there's very little flexibility. And this is because we have patchwork school choice programs. Every state writes its laws for every different program. So you might have one state that has 10 different school choice programs, and each one has its own set of laws. Some of them require all kinds of specific regulations. Others are much more regulation light, if you will. But all of that means we have a patchwork over this nation among the states that have been willing to do anything with respect to school choice, but they're all different. When you are an entrepreneur, you're trying to fit into one of those little places in each little state. It limits how you think. All of a sudden, you're not free to do what is your gift and what your passion is with respect to kids, but you're trying to fit how you can get the money. So it limits entrepreneurialism, and it limits people's flexibility. So that's another thing. John, you also spoke about how uh, captivity concentrates poverty. It concentrates low-income students around the worst schools. That means that you've got all the high poverty areas together. That means that you've got the low hope areas together. That means that crime is probably higher in those areas in most cases. And so you've got all of this criminal behavior and the way people perceive these people. They are punished more harshly than anybody else as well. So a lot of things are going on with respect to that. That is because of captivity, at least in large part.
Yes, in large
You
part.
mentioned big schools, and you talked about the fact that school violence is a result of that. Most people don't see that. You've got the small feeder elementary school that the children must then transfer to the middle school or high school that is gigantic in many cases, even in our rural areas, and certainly in our suburban areas. And all of a sudden, these children who might have been barely hanging on because of all these other low income issues now go into this big school. They now are taught by teachers who don't teach a class, they teach a subject. And when that happens, then they teach several different classes of that same subject, and they cannot possibly remember everybody's name. So this child is further lost and further alienated. And there have been studies to show that there is a direct link between the size of a school and these mass targeted shootings that are happening in rural and suburban schools. So we've got that issue. And then you talk about academic performance. And John, you mentioned the graph, which shows consistently low performance against mostly high and ever increasing money. And those two, the performance has not changed, whether the money has gone up or down. So all of these things are vastly concerning issues. All of them, we believe, tie back to the fact that students are tied down.
Exactly.
I think that that's probably enough to be going on with for an introductory talk. And I think what we ought to do now is to talk about moving into other subjects or specific subjects and talk about those. So we can be doing that um, in the future weeks. And John, you showed your book, but we've got a lot that we can do in future weeks. You talked about policytalk.org. That's the site for your organization, IOPA, and I am parked there currently. I hope to have my own website soon as well,
Well,
but there are all kinds of things that can go on.
you'll be parked
But
there even after that.
that's right. We'll be neighbors no matter what. At any rate, I think that's probably enough to be going on with now, and we thank you all for listening and being uh, uh, concerned about the same issues that we are concerned about.
Please engage with us at policytalk.org. We have email addresses there. And yeah, we need to address this because we're gradually losing our country to the miseducation and undereducation it's incurring in the current system with its centerpiece as captivity and thus the necessity to make everything political.